Hello, everybody. This is Harold Buchanan coming to you from the March 18th, 2023 SD Hist Con online. Today, I'm joined by James Buckley of Phalanx Games. How are you doing, James?
Hello, Harold. Yep, very well, thank you.
Excellent. And James is here to talk about what's going on at Phalanx Games. A lot of stuff coming and coming out. And in addition, he is going to give us a sneak peek into an expansion for Purple Haze. Maybe we get to see a little bit of gameplay, James.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to do a world premiere, without wanting to oversell it too much, of Tunnel Rats, which is one of the expansions to Purple Haze, which uses slightly different mechanics and takes you underground.
As it should, with a name like Tunnel Rats. Well, James, you have the floor. Why don't you tell us about what's going on at Phalanx?
Thank you, Harold, and apologies to everyone that, or maybe it's your good luck that there's no video of me. For some reason, my video projection has broken down for this interview, so I'll just be sharing my screens rather than my face. So I'm going to talk you through just some of the games we've got coming out in 2023 via this slide deck. And then, as I said, we'll have a chat around that and do a quick overview and example of play of Tunnel Rats. So Phalanx, hopefully most of your viewers will have heard of us. We were made most famous for U-Boot, and then also for the remakes we did of Hannibal, Hamilcar, and Successors. But we've also do a lot of other games, as we'll be talking about. So we mainly focus on historic games, and we kind of have three key things we're trying to do with our games. Really, number one, really focus on production values to really make an experience of our games. Number two, try and make the games that we produce in-house as enjoyable as possible. We want them to be historically focused and have fidelity to that, but not at the expense of enjoyment. And then also we're trying to be bold and a bit different in how we do things, a bit more adventurous in the games that we actually release, and also how we use technology, art, mechanics to try and improve the player experience. So that's really a bit about what we are all about. 2023 is going to be our biggest year really in terms of releases. We have like a backlog of crowdfunding games and pre-ordered games which are all going to be coming out this year. So I'll go through more of these in a later slide or two, but just to give you kind of an outline of what's being released hopefully this year, if production lines and schedules and shipping and etc. is met. So we've got those 5 games coming out in quarter 2. Freedom should be coming out very soon, and then Coalitions and its expansions early in the summer, and then in Q3 Purple Haze with its expansions, Brett Wilder, and Huang, which is a remake of a Reiner Knizia game called Yellow and Yangtze, which crowdfunded via GameFound. We also have some reprints coming, so we are reprinting Hannibal and Hamilcar and Successors because they keep selling out. And we're also going to do a reprint of U-Boot. This will be the same game. We're not going to do a second edition, but it will actually have some new missions on the app. So there'll be more kind of missions to explore. And actually in parallel, we are releasing with a third party an actual app software Steam game for U-Boot. So that's a game that you can just play on Steam without actually needing the board game itself. And then in the pipeline, a game called 1920, which I'll talk about shortly. And we're doing a reprint of the Charles Vasey game, Unhappy King Charles, the kind of is a classic CG of the English Civil War. So that's going to be a reprint. We're not changing the game, but we are going to change the artwork, and we're getting Donald Hegarty to redo that. And you're probably familiar with him from games like Red Flag Over Paris and Mr. President, Fire and Stone. So he's going to do, we're very excited about the kind of artwork he's going to do on Unhappy King Charles. So what I'd like to do is just give people an overview of a bit of a deep dive into the actual expansions of some of these games, because it's always the main game that gets the headline. But actually, some of the expansions are very interesting and cover interesting subjects and allow us to play around with some of the mechanics in really interesting ways. So beginning with Coalitions. Coalitions itself is a 1 to 6 player Napoleonic era strategic level game. It really focuses on the kind of like negotiation, diplomacy side of things. A lot of people that I've played it. So this is this is like the game diplomacy, but how I would like it to be made. So it really kind of like it's at that kind of level, and it plays in about up to no more than 3 hours. So it's a great game, sort of like gets into a club night or something like that. So that's the main game, but there's these 3 expansions, and I won't go into all the details, but just to give you an idea, one of the expansions, in fact, 2 of the expansions take it up to potentially up to 7 players, although the game plays very well at lower player counts as well, and they cover different eras and themes. So the 7 Years' War, or Rizantata, the 30 Years' War, and the Polish-Swedish Wars. And then finally, one called Realpolitik, which is a kind of a shorter game which introduces different types of mechanics, and that covers the German Wars of Unification. So it's not just the kind of like your standard Napoleonic era game. You can actually also use these mechanics that we've introduced, which include things like zero downtime with the certain mechanic we have to explore these other eras. So they're all very interesting games, and actually of all the games we've got coming out, I think this is the Coalitions is the one I'm personally most excited about. Moving on, Purple Haze. So Purple Haze is we got it like a story creation game. You control a squad of 6 Marines over 9 interlinked campaign missions. Those Marines will fulfill certain missions, trying to complete certain objectives. It's got RPG style aspects because you can level up your characters. They have like persistent storylines, persistent injuries. They can get better at doing things. And it also has tactical combat. So everyone should probably be quite familiar with what that game's about. We have a bunch of expansions for it as well. So we have 2 expansions under the heading of Force Recon. So that looks at Marine Special Forces. And so where the main game is more about sweep operations or hearts and minds, this is more having to rescue a downed pilot or an insertion mission. So it really kind of changes up the settings. The mechanics will change up with that. Born to Kill is a game, is an expansion with 4 completely separate missions, and the idea there is to try and capture some of the most famous films, Vietnam films. So we won't actually say what the films are, but players should be able to sort of see, oh yeah, I remember that from that setting. So it's kind of like taking it more into kind of like a more pulpy film type atmosphere as a sort of standalone games if you don't want to do campaign games. And then finally, Tunnel Rats does what it says on the tin. It puts you in control of 3 rats exploring the tunnels of South Vietnam, trying to complete certain missions, which introduces different types of mechanics. So we'll have a look at that shortly. And then Brett Wilder. So Brett Wilder was one of our biggest ever crowdfunding successes last year. And the setting is Anglo-Saxon England, at the time of the spread of Christianity, a bit prior to King Alfred. You have the Danes marauding around, and each of the 4 main kingdoms of England trying to become the king of those kingdoms, also known as the Brett Wilder. So the game is a area control dudes on the map style game, but unlike other kind of games of that genre, really focusing a lot on the history. And one of the key things about it is the beautifulness of the artwork. So the pieces of the Isle of Lewis chessmen pieces, the artworks kind of from the Book of Kells. So it's really combining more popular style mechanics of area control with this historic theme. And then the expansions, so Dannelag is the kind of like the big one. If you could only get one, you should probably go for, because that allows you to actually play as the Danes, whereas otherwise they're kind of like a non-player character. You can take control of them, introduces a 5th player into the game, and it really changes up the game, and it's really a fantastic expansion. And then a few other expansions. One, Vanished Kingdoms, gives you control of some of the minor kingdoms of England. So you'll play as Wessex or as East Anglia, but you'll have a minor kingdom that you can control to do your bidding as well, like a vassal. And Artifacts introduces some new cards and powers for your leaders. So they're the kind of like the main expansions to the games we have. And then just to quickly talk through some of these other games that we've got coming out. Freedom is a second printing. So Freedom was a game that the first printing won a CSR award for Best Late Gunpowder Era game in 2020. It's CDG, the focus is on the Greek War of Independence. It also has a really interesting way of dealing with sieges and trying to capture not just like how you knock down the walls during a siege, but how you kind of put pressure on the wider political and logistical challenges around that. So it's a really great game. It's also got a solar module. Total Domination, which is based on a game called Mini World War II. And this really allows you to, what's cool about this is it's also kind of CGG, but it has like a tech tree and allows for team play. So you have 2 versus 2. So it's really fun, ludically to play. You're meant to capture the whole of sort of World War II in just about 90 minutes. So that's going to be really kind of like a really fun club or fun game. Moving on, Iron Blood, Snow and Mud is a introductory level East Front game. Should play in about 60, 90, 120 minutes, depending on how often you've played it. The thing about this game is that you can get the feel of the East Front and what happened without having to, like, you know, spend 7 or 8 hours playing a sort of Stalingrad Simonich style game. It introduces some very innovative movement mechanics, and they're affected by the seasons of the Russian seasons. And it's actually very good value for money as well. And David Thompson of Undaunted fame actually has it down as one of his most anticipated games. He's played a prototype and he's super excited about it. On to Keep 'em Rolling, Race to the Rhine. This is a new edition of Race to the Rhine, which is like was released in 2014. It's about the race between Patton Montgomery to try and get to be the first to get to Rhine. It proved very popular because it's not like about CRTs. It's really about how you manage the supply challenges versus the race to get there first. This new expansion introduces a 4th player into the game, so you can now play at 4 rather than 3. Yeah, so it's Bradley, Patton and Montgomery. So this introduces a 4th player called Passion Divas. And it also introduces a new AI for how the Axis respond. And yes, it's got a new standalone solitaire game which captures the liberation of Brittany, which is really a really cool little standalone game. So that's Race to the Rhine, Keep 'em Rolling. And then finally, I was just going to talk about 1920. This is a remake. We're doing a re-edition of a Polish game which covers the Polish-Soviet War. It has some it's a hex encounter game, but has some very interesting kind of rules around morale and sort of spatial issues that you have to address. And again, what we're trying to do is really develop the art, so it kind of stand out game from a production perspective, and you can see sort of some of the counters there. What we're trying to do, kind of play around with the shapes a bit more to capture what different units are and the colors on the board. And the map looks really good. The map is by the same person who did the art for Brett Wilder. So Harold, that's an overview of where we are as Phalanx. Do you have any questions about that?
You know, I had one in particular, James, as you go through that. Of course, very excited to see a reprint of Unhappy King Charles by my buddy Charles Vassy.
Yeah.
But that's the only designer name that you mentioned in the list. How do you source the games? Who are the designers, and you know, are they dedicated to the company?
So we have kind of we do remakes of classic games. So we've remade a couple of like Simonich's games, obviously that was Amberg as well, so Success and Hannibal and Hamilcar, and obviously coming up with Charles Vasey. We also like to give new designers good opportunities. So Purple Haze is by a brand new designer. Coalitions was as well, although the designer of that, Andy Rourke, is now launching other games in the Napoleonic era on Kickstarter. So we do more with like new designers, and typically we'll spend quite a lot of development time working with them on it. So it's kind of like maybe a different model to other kind of like companies. We've got a 3-man strong development team full time, which is quite big for such a small company, and we spend a lot of time development. So we use a lot of first-time designers, but not averse to using other designers. And also the co-founders of the company, Yara and Valdemar, are designers themselves as well. So they will also have games. So Keep 'em Rolling, Race to the Rhine is work of both of theirs as well, and Hamilcar is one of Yarrow's games. So we do a combination of different designers and different approaches, but we're definitely not afraid of using new designers and spending development time to help get the games in the right place with them.
Well, look, it shows that that many of you are designers internally as well. I think you know, your games are designed by players for players, but you know, you just get that feel from the quality and the hard work that you all put in to the game before we all see it. You've got the opposite problem that some of our US publishers have, right? That you produce in Europe, or at least you source in Europe, right? And then, you know, how do we in the United States get access to these games without having to pay an arm and a leg for shipping?
Yeah, I mean, so we manufacture in for the most part in China, but also some in Poland, and it depends on the type of game. And you know, we like to use miniatures where appropriate, and if we're using miniatures, it's more likely the game will be done in China, or at least the miniatures will be made in China. But Purple Haze, for example, I think it's being made in Poland. So it depends on the game. Yeah, so we don't have our own business in for example in the US. So we use a distributor for that. That said, almost all the games will come out on retail. So everything that we kickstart or crowdfund via GameFound will produce a lot of extra copies based on it, depending on how successful the crowdfunding is. We basically have a general idea how successful it's going to be in retail, and we'll produce that many copies accordingly. And then people can pre-order them, and they will just get that through the distributor. So they shouldn't have to pay more for that. It might take a little while to get the on the ship over if it's coming from the UK, from Europe, but it shouldn't be more difficult. But yeah, it's not going to be as easy to get our games necessarily as to get like a GMT or a Compass game, but it's definitely possible via retailers who our distributors reach.
Well, you know, it's not an uncommon issue with all of our European customers that want US published games.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
Canada is a very expensive place for us to ship, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. If you're trying to order it from, say, if you're trying to order it from our web store, and we would send it to you directly from our Polish, storage, that will cost you shipping costs, which are high. So that's not the best way. The best way is to, I if you back it via Kickstarter and the shipping costs, we try and get the best shipping costs we can, and that's how a lot of people will do it because they want the game up front and they want to support it, and that's really how the Kickstarter model works. Or if it's particularly kind of like a bigger game, it will come out in retail in the US. You just have to go to Noble Knight or whoever the main kind of retailers are, and they should have it. And if you pre-order it and they get pre-orders, they'll order it in.
Well, that's interesting. So your model is mostly initial distribution through Kickstarter?
Yeah, for the most part, we have so we have a sort of like a separate Polish business, which also localizes, but our distribution model is basically for the bigger games. So Coalitions, Purple Haze, Brett Wilder will use crowdfunding, typically GameFound, but sometimes Kickstarter, and that will fund the game, hopefully, if it's popular. And then from that, we will have enough funds also, not only to sort of like develop the game, but also to produce enough retail copies to take a risk on how many retail copies to produce. And then that will become available down the track once the backers via Kickstarter and GameFound have received their copies. So that's our main model, but we also have a sort of a pre-order model for smaller games or games which just really aren't suitable for crowdfunding, more niche type games. And for those, you'll do it via pre-order. So Freedom, the Greek independence game, that second printing was funded via pre-orders rather than crowdfunding, and that works like a pre-order system that you'd get from GMT or someone like that. They get a set, we get 300 or 500, whatever the number is, orders in, we charge, and it will be posted out to you.
That's great. Well, I think with my FOMO, I'm going to have to start kickstarting everything you all do. As
Please
you
do,
go through
please
the
do.
catalog here, I'm disappointed there's some that I don't own.
Oh yeah, no, please do spread the word.
Good.
So shall I talk to you quickly about tunnel rats then?
Please do. Yes.
Okay, so this, I'll begin by saying this is a prototype. It's just last week gone out to our external playtesting group, which we call the Vanguard. We've got quite a big external playtesting group that we use, and it's now with them, so it's subject to potential change. But from an internal perspective, we're kind of like in a fairly good place with it. I thought it'd be good to share it with you. No one's really seen it before, and just to give you an idea of what it's like. So the art's not the final art. Things might change, and I'm not going to do any kind of like spoilers here. We'll just walk through kind of like I just prepared a small example of what could happen. So you can buy this game without having Purple Haze itself, but the kind of core idea is the same. You are this small team of rats, and you are experiencing what they went through their eyes via triggering sort of certain stories as you explore the tunnels, or in Purple Haze, it's the map itself. And these rats have their own stats, their own kind of like particular kind of abilities, and there's 6 of them in this expansion. So what we have in front of you is, in this game, because you're exploring a tunnel for the first time, there's no map. You actually create the tunnel as you move through it. At the start of each mission, you're given kind of some background story to the mission. It might be, for example, that an F4 Phantoms crashed and the 2 pilots were known to get out alive, and someone thinks they might have been taken into a particular tunnel, and you've been sent in to try and rescue them. And that's an example of the mission, and you've got a number of objectives you have to complete as part of that mission before a certain amount of time runs out. What I'll do is I'll just show you how that works in this game and some of the key concepts. So what I've done, I've set up here, we've just imagined that the rats have gone in, they've gone this far, and you can exit via any of these exits as the rat you choose. So this is a
Hey,
1 to 3.
James, I can only see your PowerPoint.
Okay. Sorry about that. Then let me just change the. Okay, so how do I call it? Sorry, hold give me a second.
I can see it now.
So yeah, slight technical issue there. So I was just explaining what you have in front of you is the beginnings of a tunnel complex that you as the players will actually create as you go around the map. So you have a team of rats, and each is slightly different with different traits and different abilities, and you are leading them through this tunnel and trying to complete certain objectives. So I've just sort of started off. We've already entered this entrance, and we've gone down here, and we are trying to complete the objective, which, like I say, might be trying to find some pilots or gather some intel. So I've decided that we want to move this way in the tunnel. So I'm going to start creating a tunnel. So the first thing I do when I want to exit a tunnel into a new tunnel, I take one of these fret die and I'll give it a roll. And that's a good outcome. That's a green. That means there's no fret. But what happens is that if it's a yellow or a red, fret is going to start going up on this fret track. And fret represents the kind of external hostility and danger you're facing as you get in the tunnel. And as you go down, it's going to get higher and higher and higher. And if you get to the 9, there could be like a random combat that you need to resolve against VC in the tunnel. But rolling a green's great. That means there's no fret. So now I'm trying to create my tunnel. So I'll pull and see what I've created. These decks are have already been sort of seeded beforehand. So what this tells me is I've made it into the next tunnel. There's no dead ends, and this red icon here on the top left tells me it costs me 1 tough bastard card to do that. So tough bastardness is a concept in the game which kind of represents the internal stress and ballsiness essentially of the rats. And when the deck runs out, that's the end of the mission. So that's when they've just lost their bottle, when the tough bastardness runs out. So they've already used some early on getting here, so that's cost them 1 to move into there. So we'll move that to there and into that discard pile. So we're going to carry on moving. I'm going to go this way, and we'll roll again. That's a grey, so there's no threat either there. I'm going to keep going this way. See what we get. Okay, that's another tunnel there. And you'll see that there's 2 there now. So I've got to discard 2 of these. I go 1. And now this is the last card in this particular deck, so I actually have to resolve it. And this will be a mini encounter. So I'll resolve this card and we'll see what it says. Darkness. Pop, the bulb on your torch goes. Randomly select 1 rat. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to randomly select one of these rats. So number 2, that's this one. A slight stumble and a torch hits the side of the corridor, popping. It's broken and needs replacing in near darkness. So now this rat has got to do a test. If the threat were red, which is not, it would be a difficulty 3, but it's difficulty 2. So I'm going to roll these 3 die. And what I'm trying to do is test against that rat's intelligence. If you look at this, the guy's intelligence, he's got an intelligence of 2. So I need to get 2 successes from those 3 dice, which means I need to get 2 or under. Fortunately, I've managed to actually do that. So I've got 2 successes there. So I passed the test. Success. All the practice after lights out in the barracks was worth it. That torch is fixed in no time. So that event is resolved happily without any issues. That's just a kind of micro event that will happen. So we're going to carry on moving. We'll get to here. I can go up and down as well. I can go wherever I want, but I'm just, for example, going here. Okay, so I've moved into here. Again, it's telling me I've got to get rid of these 2 cards. So you can see that over time, you're going to be burning through these cards, and how you manage this tough bastard deck is going to have an effect on how successful you are in the mission. Now I've entered an event space, so this is where the story comes to life, and we actually have to resolve an event. So at this point, if you're playing the game, you will then refer to the mission booklet and start reading through what is there. So I'll read a bit of what they're telling, what it says. Unusually loud sounds in the tunnels are always a cause for alarm, unless you're the one making them. The sound coming from just around the bend isn't typical either. It's a low, mechanically sounding continuous swoosh. As you come nearer, you can see more. A steady glow from the room isn't candlelight either. It must be coming from an electric bulb. An underground generator? You look carefully inside, hoping not to get noticed. The noise is coming from a man riding a stationary bicycle, powering a couple of light bulbs, possibly some tools. There are also 4 people inside, hunched over what looks like weapons, mines, booby traps, grenades. It's filled with ordnance, a veritable treasure trove. So at this point, the game asks you to make a decision about if you want to move in to attack the VC by surprise, or wait to see if any of the VC leave. So I would say we'll wait to see if any of the VC leave, because combat is always deadly in the tunnels. And then we would do a couple more tests, which I won't go through now. And if we were successful, the following would happen. Patience pays off. After a while, 2 of the VC say something to the rest, probably goodbyes by the sound of it, and leave through another opening in the room away from you. There's now only 3 people inside. You coordinate the attack almost perfectly. The VC, especially those close to the entrance, scramble to get weapons before your rats get the jump on them. So we'll now move to a combat, and the game will tell you how to set up the combat, and it's telling me to set up an elite and 2 standard VC. The game also tells me that because I've got the jump on them in this particular instance, I have the rats have the initiative. So I'm just going to determine which rats have which initiative. And then we'll do the same for the VC. And the initiative is very important because it determines who gets to go first and who wins ties. So you really want to be having the initiative. So in the tunnels, the rats begin with their standard equipment is a torch and a knife, but you can also take a pistol or use a silencer with it, and you have to choose that before combat begins. So a pistol was the best weapon, but it being very loud, it means you have to discard more TB cards. Silencers quite good, but actually historically the tunnel rats weren't very keen on using silencers because they were very unwieldy, and actually they still made quite a loud sound. They just kind of suppressed more the light. So we'll just give, just to show how it works, one a pistol, one a silencer, and one just having a knife by itself. So now I'll show you how the combat works. The combat works on the game Blackjack. So the idea is that in a very abstract way, we were trying to capture the kind of like the push your luck element of Blackjack in the same way that the rats might try and push their luck under the tunnels. What we're trying to do is get to 21 or get to close to 21 before the VC do, or then the VC do in a combat. So this guy is going first, he's number 1. He will choose who wants to attack. He might have a special ability. So his special ability is count jokers you draw as being 1 and 9. So this one is better at attacking elites. So I'll let him attack the elites. And this guy is going to attack one of these standards. Let's say he attacks him. And what will happen is this guy will draw cards, and you draw on behalf of the VC. And you're trying to do the best you can to the VC. So he's got 13. What's that? 15. He'll stop at 17. So he's got 20. That's not great for our marine, our rat. So let's see what he gets. 6, 9, 16. So what do you think, Harold? Do you think we should try and push it and get to 21? The reason we might not want to is if we go bust, we're going to take a bit of extra damage. But if we manage to get it, we'll be taking this guy out. What do you think?
I think we got to try.
I would agree. The other thing is this guy's got a silencer, and the special ability of a silencer is if you draw a card, if the last card you draw makes you go bust, you can discard it to draw another one. So let's see. Oh, that was quite good. So that's 20. So he's got 20 as well. So they've both got 20. My maths is correct. So that's great. The initiative player wins. So that means 1. This guy is eliminated, but he does do some damage because he does 1 damage automatically there, and there is potential to do a bit more damage, but he didn't achieve it. So this rat's going to take a damage. Now, because he used a silencer, that's going to cost us another TB card. So you always have a sort of a choice to make. Do I want to do give myself more chance of winning, but it's going to actually endanger overall my success of the mission itself? And then you might notice the cards were a little bit risque. We kind of like went for that because I think it kind of is quite, these are the kind of cards that they would have been playing with above ground, in downtime, and I think it creates quite a nice kind of dissonance with the kind of like undergroundness and the alienness of the tunnels, that you play these cards to capture what's going on in the real world for them, not in the tunnels. So that's how combat will work, and then you'd resolve it for all of them. And sometimes you can get terrible draws, and as threat gets higher, the VC, more and more stuff happens to the VC. They get to do additional things, which makes your life even more difficult. So you do all that. If you're successful, you'd read following text, and it will tell you what happens next. And then you continue on with the mission, unless you've been eliminated or failed or run out of cards, in which case you would want to start again. So this is these aren't campaigns. These are more like do the best you can and then try again and try and do better and see what score you can get. There'll be a way over the 3 missions in the expansion to see what your score is overall. You're going to score if you meet certain objectives, if you explore certain things. So it's about trying to improve, and there's the stories and the different story events. You won't see them all, and they can go different ways. So you're going to get different experiences, and hopefully quite a lot of replayability that way. And yeah, there's like 18 of these different cards that you're never going to see all of them in a game. So that's what I was going to show you so far on Tunnel Rats, Harold.
So how many TB cards do you get each time? You said there are a lot of them, but
well, it will vary. So it'll do, like in the first mission, as currently drafted, you only explore 2 levels, and so you have fewer TB cards. As you go up, as the missions get more difficult, we give you more TB cards. And we're still kind of like, although we've played it quite a lot now, learning how, what is the best thing to do. And there's different schools of thought about it's really good just to burn your TB cards to make sure that you win the fights, because at a certain point these guys start taking a lot of damage. So that's one school of thought, or another is just to roll with that and try and keep as many TB cards as possible. So the number will vary. For a smaller mission, it's about 9, and for the bigger mission, it's 11. That 11 is like an extra 20 cards. That there's two steps up for like an extra or 21 cards. So you can see that every time you add an extra tough bastard card, it gives you a lot more things you can move through. A lot of the missions are going to say as well. So the mission might be you find a prisoner, you have to take them back to the entrance, and every time you go back through a discovered space, you have to discard 1 card. Or if you're taking back a couple of prisoners, they're making a lot of noise, threats going up, and you have to discard 2 cards. So you're going to start burning through them quite quickly. Some of these encounters that you'll come across will go very well, that or some events will go well, or something funny might make the rats laugh, and they get 1 back because they're just relaxing a little bit. So how you manage that is kind of like one of the core mechanics.
Very interesting. Looks like a lot of good solo fun there.
Yeah, it plays 1 to 3. Maybe solo is best, but the good thing about playing multiplayer is that you get more of the kind of like the interaction of the rats dynamic together to get, what would your rat do in this situation? Because you often got a lot of choices. So if you're the lead man, you might do this, but someone else might say, well, my rat doesn't really want to do that. He's not that kind of a guy. You develop these kind of micro narratives. So that's the benefit of, you can do that, of course, just in your head as solitaire, but multiplayer gives you more kind of like, actual possibilities around that. But yeah, it works well at both, but it certainly is a very good solitaire game.
Yeah, be very nice.
So there we are. That's Phalanx for 2023. Lots coming out, and all of these games you can still pre-order or late pledge. If you go onto the Phalanx website, you'll see it, or you can still late pledge for Tunnel Rats and for all of Purple Haze, and for all of the games I've talked about, you can still order them.
Good stuff, James. Very impressive book of work there that you all are putting together, and love that it's some interesting and new angles at historical games.
Great. Thank you, Harold, and thanks for having us on.
Yeah, and appreciate you joining us, and hope to get you at a on-site face-to-face SD Hist Con sometimes, James.
If you cover the expenses, I'm happy to fly out there.
That's the shipping problem we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. One day maybe I'll work on it.
All right. Thanks, James.
All right. Thanks, Harold.
Bye-bye.